Hello ladies and gentlemen, and today I'll be having a guide on positioning. I've been asked a lot about how to position in a lot of different situations, and I want to start off this video by saying that I do not know how to position in a lot of situations. Positioning is a nuance that's difficult to figure out, and something that's going to be evolving as the game evolves as well. I'm giving you my best judgment as well as giving you tips on how to position, especially in certain situations in the early game as well as late game positioning with specific comps. You should think of positioning as kind of like an MMO, where you'll have melee DPS, tanks, ranged DPS, and assassins. Where you want to position your tanks are at the front line, taking all the damage. Your melee DPS does the most damage in melee range, but remember, they're also the squishiest, so you want them to taking the least amount of damage. They should never take immediate aggression based on your positioning. Your ranged DPS should be well protected in the backline and position so they don't get jumped on by assassins and isolated. So how do you position your tanks to soak the most damage in the game? Well, first of all, you should think of positioning as a situation where generally speaking, your opponent can choose to position their units on the left, the middle, or the right side of the map. Most of the times, most of the people do not position in the middle. You should assume that attack comes from the left or the right. What this means is that the unit you have at the very farthest forward of the board is going to get hit first, regardless whatever else happens, assuming you position in the direct middle as well. Additionally, units that will be on the far left and far right have a higher chance of getting targeted first. This is because usually people position their units on the far left or the far right in terms of formations. Commonly what ends up happening is I feel a lot of people end up stacking on the left side, and since the game mirrors your position and reflects it on their board, that means the enemy spawns most commonly on the right side. So what happens is when I position my tank, usually my tank is positioned at the furthest forward point, far right or the far left. That way they're the first thing to get focused. My tanky DPS, or I would say my melee DPS, usually gets positioned right behind or right next to my tank, so they don't get focused as hard or immediately, because you really want the tank to get all the damage while your melee DPS, who could be squishy, something like Fiora, is doing as much damage before they die, even if they lose 1 second or 1 hex worth of travel time. While we're on this topic matter, we should also remember, and this will be important in the future, that assassin positioning is very interesting. Assassins jump to the farthest unit away from them on the opposite side. So you should just kind of cut the map in half and kind of think, if my position is here on the hex, my assassin is going to jump on the exact opposite adjacent side of the board. They start out stealth and they jump in. This makes it so that when you're positioning your assassin, you want it to jump probably toward the weakest unit or the backline range DPS, and their assassin wants to do the same. They want to kill your Vayne, they want to kill your Lulu, anything in the far back that can do a lot of damage but is relatively squishy. So while we're on the topic of formations, let's talk about how to actually use this theory in reality. And I'll do this starting with a formation that can be very common as soon as level 4. I call this formation the Y formation, mainly because when I stream, we jokingly called it the Y formation and then it just caught on. So the Y formation requires 4 units, and you kind of push them in one straight diagonal line and add a unit to the left of the diagonal line. So it kind of looks like a Y. It makes sense, right? Your strongest tank is on the, or your tankiest unit is on the top right of the formation, and then your melee DPS is on the left, because you want your top right unit to tank first. Your melee DPS immediately joins. The bottom left unit is the most interesting one. It is not your ranged DPS. Your ranged DPS unit is actually in the middle of the formation. And the entire reason why this formation was made was for one reason and one reason alone. And that reasoning is because Kha'Zix is the #1 most annoying unit for me to play against early game. He has an ability that if their ranged DPS is isolated, he does extra damage and it will kill pretty much everyone 1v1. So what this formation does is it forces a unit to be on the very back that tends to either intercept the assassin when he jumps in, or create a position to where if the assassin does jump on my ranged DPS, while my very far back end of the Y unit is coming toward the middle of the board, it'll stop next to this assassin, and while it may not attack it, my ranged DPS unit is close enough either to my front line or to the back line Y unit that it doesn't get isolated. So this formation is entirely built around the idea of stopping Kha'Zix and ranged assassins from isolating your one ranged DPS. Now, counters to this comp are if you're against mages such as Ahri, which can AoE down your units very quickly. You don't want Vayne to be up that close. And additionally, champions that AoE, similar to Ari like Graves that go through units, will also hit Vayne in this position when usually they can't. Yeah, we made the Y formation. I just recorded a video about this formation today. And in the recording, I'm going to talk about how if you're playing against Graves, you actually get countered by doing this formation. Wait, the Graves literally IE crit me and I died. However, even with all those downsides, I tend to use this formation quite a lot just because this is how much I hate assassins and Kazakhs early. Another early game formation that I want to talk about is gunslinger positioning, specifically gunslingers with Graves. Graves is a really interesting unit in the sense that he splashes his damage and he's considered a front line, but you don't want him to be taking damage. However, you do want him to give you angles to do a lot of damage because his buckshot can just obliterate teams, especially with items. Gunslingers have a very unique position, especially Graves, in that you put Graves in the top right hex where there's only 1 or 2 units that could possibly attack him, but he gets a great curve onto any units that tend to stack onto the right side of the board. Additionally, if they don't stack on the right side of the board, because he's behind another unit, your actual tank will be positioned left of the Graves in this situation. The actual tank will move forward to the left first and soak the damage anyways, so that if there's an encounter that stabilizes toward the middle of the board, Graves doesn't get hit first, and it should clump up for Graves to be able to do maximum amounts of damage. This positioning maximizes your Graves positioning damage, and while this is happening, you can kind of create like a mini Y formation with your Tristana to make sure she doesn't get isolated by assassins as well. Finally, I want to talk about assassin positioning. Assassins are probably the composition that I understand positioning the most in late game. So the biggest thing and the biggest counter to assassins is clumping in the corner. And a lot of assassin players I see don't correctly position their front line to be able to make them come out. Your job as the assassin player is to drag the backline away so you can isolate that juicy Ash or Aurelion Soul in the corner, crit it, and win the team fight. So how do you do this? You position your front line at the very first row. And what happens here in this position is that they take the longest to run toward the opposite team. On top of this, the opposite team takes the longest to run to them. And because your assassins stay invisible for the first half second of the fight, everyone is aggroed onto your front line, so they'll ignore all the assassin positioning. So it's very, very common for your assassin positioning to have tanks on the first row, assassins surrounding the tanks, bottling them in to force them so that they can't move at the very start of the fight, on top of the fact that it isolates the enemy assassins from being able to jump on them immediately because they'll kind of body block for a half second, and then both assassins, your assassins and their assassins, will jump, and creates kind of, I guess, a stalling effect. This is the best way to play assassins right now. And while there could be an argument on where in the backline you position them against very different types of corner stackers, left or right, this is so important. I can't stress this enough. I think a lot of people fall behind on assassins late game because they're not positioning correctly in this specific situation, and this is something that you really need to know if you're looking to play assassins kind of past 6 or 7 units. Thank you so much for watching. If you guys enjoyed this, please like, comment, subscribe, and see you guys next time.